chauffeur. I'll call Nigel Evans now, yes? Yes?
Yes,
Straight.
and then listen to a speech.
Nigel Evans.
Thank you very much.
Speaking.
Mr. Walker, it is a delight to start this debate under your chairmanship. And it is also a delight to see the Minister in his place, who is known as a champion of parental choice when it comes to education. And I look forward to the response that he is going to make to this debate about school transport costs. And in many ways, this is not even a partisan debate. This is all about parental choice. It's all about whether people should be, in essence, fined or taxed for sending their youngsters to the school that they would prefer. And this could be something dealing with either a faith-based school, it could be a grammar school that somebody has managed to pass the 11 plus or the admission exam and has got admitted to. It could be that there is a single-sex school where the child and parents would prefer that child to go. I shall clearly focus it on the Ribble Valley, Mr. Walker, but this, I understand, is happening increasingly in a number of other areas now. And we know that a lot of local authorities are under financial stress. They've got to live within their budgets. They've got to look for savings. But I'm contending today, irrespective of party colour of the control of that local authority, they are picking on this particular issue of school transport costs because they have, in the main, an element of discretion. We know that for some youngsters who are on free school meals or family tax credits, that irrespective of where they live, they're going to get their support paid for. But for the vast majority of everybody else who are not on free school meals or working tax credits, they could find themselves having to pay over £500 in Lancashire per child, simply because the school that they would wish their child to go to is just a bit further than the next nearest school. And I hope to, later on in my speech, pick on at least one absurd example where this happens, where the schools actually back on to one another, and yet parents are being asked to fork out £500 a time, simply because they wish that their child to go to, in this case, the Catholic school. Now, when I say I'm not being partisan, I'm not, and I have had an email from the Honourable Member for West Lancashire, who would like to have been here today but has had to return to her constituency. And she emailed me to say that she strongly opposes the county stand on education transport costs. Those who exercise their rights to religious education, where the school is more than the specified distance from home, are forced to pay transport costs if there is a state school closer. This is outrageous, and you have my full support on this issue. And she said that she would be delighted if I would share that with the Chamber today. I have had a number of parents over the last 12 months contacting my office about their youngsters and the fact that they find that their choices now coming with financial strings. For a lot of people who are just above the free school meal level or the working tax credit level, they find themselves actually being stung out of taxed income, as I say, up to about £500. And so parents from Mellor, one from near Burnley, just outside my patch, Lango, inside my area, Samlesbury, Chipping, Bamber Bridge, Wiltshire, Lostock Hall, and several parents from Waddington, Dunsop Bridge and surrounding districts contacted me just before the general election to say that they were outraged at one particular instance where the school that the local authority were edging them towards, suggesting that this was the school that they wanted them to take because it was in their catchment area. It's where all the youngsters tend to go to, which is Bowland High School, and that's where the county would want them to send their youngsters. Then the parents got in touch with me and said, so we put that school down, Mr. Evans, as number one. And we were delighted when we got it, because maybe that's where their other siblings were going or where their friends were going. And then the bombshell happened. They received a letter from the county council to say, you've been given this school, that was your first preference, but we have to tell you that as the crow flies, your nearest school is Clitheroe, and you're now going to be charged £500 per child for sending your youngster to the school we wanted you to send them to. This is absolutely outrageous. Absolutely outrageous for them to do that. And of course, once you've made that choice, then there's nothing you can do. Now, if the parents had known in advance, of course, they could have put Clitheroe down as their first choice. And more than likely, it would have been turned down because Clitheroe would have been full with youngsters who tend to live from around that area. And then they would have said, you now have to take your second choice, which is Bowland High, and because it's your second choice, we will pay. And so there is a huge anomaly that has now resulted from the fact that the council want to save some money, and they think they can do it by scorching parents for £500 a child. I mean, I've received a letter, because I wrote to the chief exec of Lancashire County Council saying, you know, this is appalling and please have a look at it and do something about it. And what she wrote back to me in September of 2014 and said, the council has no statutory duty to provide transport assistance in circumstances where pupils do not attend their nearest school or academy. Granting assistance to pupils who attend faith schools and academies which are not the nearest establishments to a home address is a discretionary element of the council's policy. And of course, that's what it's all about. It's the discretionary bit. And council by council throughout the country are deciding, this is easy pickings, we're going to ignore the discretionary bit, we're not going to give it, even on appeal when people write and say, actually, they're finding it rather hard to provide the £500 per child, and they're still getting turned down, and they've got to, if they want their youngster to go to that school, then they're going to have to pay. Now, in the olden days, when they were deciding where to put the Catholic school in Clitheroe, many people thought that it should have actually been in the centre. But they were said, no, we've got some land out in Billington, that's where it's going to go. But don't worry, there's going to be school transport for the youngsters to be ferried from Clitheroe out to Billington, and it'll be at no cost. And so no protest was made at that time about the siting of the school. It's a very, very good school. And for lots of Catholic parents in Clitheroe, that's where they want to send their youngsters. Well, heck, they have to pass at least 2 schools in some cases, if not just the one, before they get to the Catholic school. And therefore, if they want their youngsters to go to the Catholic school and they're from Clitheroe or outlying villages, they have to pay the full cost. Call me old-fashioned, but I think that's discrimination. Because what you're saying to the parents is, if you want a faith-based education, you're going to have to pay. If you want to go to the non-faith-based school, then you'll get it for free. And that cannot be right. If we believe in parental choice, as I know the Minister does, as a champion of parental choice, then surely we should ensure that if people wish, within reasonable distances, I'm not saying that somebody should be able to travel 40 miles down the road to a school because that's the one where they want their youngster to go to, but within a reasonable distance, maybe the distance that they prescribe themselves, which could be up to 15 miles, then that should be eligible for free school transport. Now, when I received this letter as well from Jo Turton, the Chief Executive of Lancashire County Council, and she was explaining to me how much money the council had to cut back on, and it requires difficult decisions. Well, I was looking at this, and I then decided to find out how much the Chief Executive of Lancashire County Council earns. And it's a package, including pensions and all that sort of stuff, of £206,000. Well, that's a bit eye-watering. It's rather high. Why doesn't she make some difficult decisions there? Cut it back. Maybe, because the salary bit is 169,000, maybe make a difficult decision and cut it back to below what the Prime Minister earns, which, as we know, is 147,000 if he took it all, which he doesn't. So that would be a nice difficult decision for her to make. And indeed, there are 7 salaries, if grouped together, on Lancashire County Council, which come to over £1 million. Make a difficult decision there. Cut it back. Lead from the front. That would be courageous. No, they won't do that, but they expect the parents to dip into their own taxed income to pay £500 a child, and that cannot be right. Now, I said I wanted to mention at least one area where the two schools back onto one another, and that's in Longridge. You've got Longridge High School, and then you've got the Catholic school St. Cecilia's just behind. So if you're a youngster coming from, and I've got 30-odd wonderful, lovely villages, and you want your child to get educated in Longridge, which is where the nearest schools are, the secondary schools are, and you happen to be Catholic, then, of course, the bus stops outside Longridge High School first. Now, the fact that they back on to one another and that the youngsters can get out, and I understand do get out at Longridge High, and then walk through a ginnel to get to St. Cecilia's, is fine. But the Catholics get charged. It's only those who go to Longridge High that don't get charged. That is clearly an absurdity. And woe betide you if you decide that you want the education that is offered by the grammar school, and you manage to pass the admissions exam, and you pass another school that is non-grammar, you have to pay. Well, that seems to me like a tax or a penalty on success, on academic success. I mean, I'm really lucky. I've got some very good schools. I don't think there's a single school in my constituency that if I had any children, I'd have any reservations about them going to. But if I decided I wanted them to go to the grammar school, or indeed to the Catholic school or another faith-based school, then I don't see why I should be absolutely penalised for the fact that I am taking my parental choice. I mentioned Bowland High School. It tends to be quite smaller than Ribblesdale School in Clitheroe. Now, some parents make a decision that maybe they have a sensitive child, that they would prefer that child to be educated in a more rural setting, or that it's got a brilliant sports centre, relatively new, that they would prefer them to go to that particular school. And yet, and it may well be actually because of it has a certain speciality in the arts or sciences, then if you choose that school, you are going to be penalised because the local authority, whilst it has discretion, has decided that it's not going to use that discretion. And indeed, I'm delighted to see the chairman, the newly elected chairman, popular choice of the Education Select Committee, and I took the opportunity to raise this issue with him as soon as the jubilation of his success had died down, to suggest to him that one of the inquiries that his committee might like to look into would be this particular policy, which is that we all believe that education should be free at the point of use, that parents have the choice, if they wish, to pay for their youngster to go, let's say, in my constituency, Stonyhurst, which is a private school, and if you want to pay the fees, you can go there. It's a fantastic school. And I don't think that anybody would have any quibbles that you have to pay transport costs to get your own youngster then to that private school. You've made that firm decision. But if you wish your child to go to a school within the state sector, and you decide that either it's single-sex or it's faith-based or the grammar, then I don't believe that you deserve to be caned. If you've got 2 or 3 children, it can be incredibly expensive. And also, you might find, Mr. Walker, that people are now making choices not based on what is in the best interest of the youngster, but sadly, what is in the best interests of their wallets or their purses, simply because they have difficult financial decisions themselves to make. I've also received correspondence from the Association of Colleges, where they've pointed out to me that, of course, post-16, they have to pay, parents have to pay anyway. And we've moved into a different era now where people are expected to go to colleges between the ages of 16 and 18 in the main. Therefore, this is something that local authorities have not caught up with. And it could be incredibly expensive to have a 16-year-old who's going to a specialist college, which is a few miles away, and they're going to have to stump up for them. This hits people irrespective of what sort of constituency you represent. But I think particularly it hits harder at rural areas, where the grammar schools or the secondary schools tend to be further spaced out. And of course, people themselves living in villages miles away, what we know is that in lots of cases, the rural transport is inferior to what's going on in the urban areas. It may well be that the parents themselves have got to make the decision as to whether they ferry their youngsters themselves as they're going on to work. And it's particularly galling when they see the bus coming into their village, where youngsters who are going to the nearest school get on. They know they're getting it for free. And there are spaces on that bus, and yet the parent has to take their child in themselves because they can't afford the £500 and odd each year to pay for the school transport. Something even more surprising is that the County Council have already stated that each year the cost to the parent is going to go up by 5% above the rate of inflation. Well, we're delighted, thanks to the long-term economic plan, that inflation is as low as it is. But 5% year on, compounded, can be incredibly expensive. In closing, Mr. Walker, what I would like the Minister to do, and I've raised this several times in the House, and I know that it is the responsibility of another government department, but what I want, dearly, is for them to come to a decision that parental choice will be backed up and will not be fined, academic success will not be penalised, and that parents within a reasonable distance will be able to get their youngsters ferried to school. You know, in some rural areas, it's very dangerous to try and even attempt walking or indeed taking the bicycle because, you know, the roads are quite dangerous. What I want is the discretion removed. What I want is every youngster to be put on the same level so that when they're going to the school of their choice within a reasonable distance, that they know that it's a choice that they've made in the best interest of their youngsters, that they're not going to be penalised, they're not going to get the local authority using them as cash cows to make up the shortfall because they won't make difficult decisions in other areas. I am pleading with the Minister, please let's not let this drag on, year on, year on. Let's help the local authorities to make the decision by removing the discretion and ensuring that parents are able to have full parental choice on the decision where they decide to send their youngsters.
The question is that this House has considered the cost of school transport. Alison Thewlis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Walker. I rise in great interest at this motion. I thank the Honourable Member for bringing this debate, because in Glasgow today and this afternoon there are protesters outside Glasgow City Chambers protesting at cuts to bus services within the Glasgow City area as well. Glasgow City Council has decided to raise the qualifying distance for free bus passes in the city from 1.2 miles for primary school pupils up to 2 miles, and from 2.2 miles for secondary school pupils up to 3 miles, which is quite a considerable distance. If you're a primary one pupil starting at the age of 5 come August, quite a considerable distance to go to. I may not be able to refrain from being partisan in my comments this afternoon, because it is a choice that is being made, and that choice is coming as a result of austerity and cuts from here to the Scottish Parliament and down on to councils, and it's a difficult choice that councils have to make in coming to these decisions. We also in Scotland have a slightly less complex picture of schools and choices for pupils to go to. In Glasgow, while catchment areas are there and can be quite complex, by and large, pupils will go to the local schools of their choice within that catchment area. There won't often be cases where you're going past another school to get to the one that you want to go to. People will go to, in most cases, their local school. But the decisions that Glasgow City Council have come to in looking to change the costs of bus passes and put that back onto parents, it causes serious difficulties for parents who can't afford to pay for those bus passes. And for children whose parents can't afford it, they will have to walk significant distances across busy roads through perhaps industrial estates and derelict areas. And if this is a daunting prospect in our glorious Scottish summer that we're having at the moment, what prospect will that be in winter time, when in Scotland it's quite often dark when you leave the house in the morning and dark when you come back in the afternoon? It's a pretty grim thought. Parents are advised by the Education Department in Glasgow to that children should be accompanied, and where children are young, yes, they should be accompanied to school, but this also poses serious difficulties for parents who have more than one child to take to a different place in the morning. So there may be a nursery drop-off in one part of an area, a primary school drop-off in another part of an area, and indeed also in some circumstances a secondary school too. So for parents to try and make all of those journeys in the morning is a practical impossibility. Glasgow also has a very low level of car ownership, with about particularly in low and deprived areas in the city where reliance on bus services is far greater. In 2012, only about half of households in Glasgow had access to a car, so bus transport is very much important to families, and there is no other option in a lot of cases other than to use public transport if you do not have access to a car. The proposal by the council has been attempted on several occasions by Labour administration in the city, and has been rejected by the people and has been eventually rolled back on by the council. And I do hope that they can see sense in this and find the money elsewhere. But more significantly, it also reneges on promises that were made by Glasgow City Council during the last series of school closures within the city, where lots of schools were closed, merged, and parents were reassured at that time that the cost of transport and that school bus passes would be provided for these schools. And that was in 2008. And now they are finding that the council has reneged on that promise, and parents are now facing serious costs for school transport. It's unfair, and it will disadvantage children who are already in many parts of the city suffering significant poverty. There are food banks, there are multiple areas of multiple deprivation. If you have several children going to school as well, and you're trying to get several children to school, the cost is disproportionate too. So it is deeply, deeply unfair that the cost of transport is falling to families at this time. It's my understanding that a lot of some of the rules around the qualifying distances come back to a House of Lords ruling in 1986, and I think if that is the case, then it is certainly time for that to be revised, because something that was decided such a long time ago and is now affecting people now is surely ripe for revision, because it is a long time ago. Things have changed. There are far more cars on the road. Things are much busier in a lot of our cities, with heavier and heavier goods vehicles moving across the city. And I think that we do need to be mindful that young children who may want to walk to school in some cases will also find a great deal of traffic in the roads. I would just like to say that I fully support this debate, and I think there should be further action on this. There should be further consideration of this, particularly in Scotland, where we do have a slightly different situation, and children are trying to go to their local schools and parents are trying to get them there. And I think there is a lot that we could do to help parents in this situation, and look again at these qualifying distances to see if something better could be put in place. Thank you very much.
Ozzy.
Thank you, Mr. Walker, and it's a great pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and may I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Ribble Valley, on bringing forward this debate, and may I endorse all of the remarks that he has made in his very eloquent and articulate speech. And his bringing forward of this debate is incredibly timely, as far as I'm concerned, because I received an email only this morning from a parent in my constituency asking me the question, I'm wondering what your views are on the school transport proposals. And I should explain that Warwickshire County Council, in the same way as Lancashire County Council, has embarked on a consultation to changes to the the supply of school transport to children who don't choose their closest and most immediate school. And this consultation just opened. It's opened on Tuesday and runs until the 17th of September. And so, of course, children who enter into their secondary school in September of this year, September 2016, won't be affected by this. But, of course, those children who start their secondary school in September 2017, if these proposals are adopted, will be affected by exactly the same changes that my honourable friend has spoken of. And I should explain, in Rugby, that the issue is that of grammar schools. My honourable friend spoke about the impact of parents who wish their children to attend faith-based schools, or to attend single-sex schools, or to attend grammar schools. In Rugby, we have retained a selective system. We're relatively unique within the eastern part of Warwickshire, and we have some absolutely spectacularly good grammar schools in Lawrence Sheriff School, of which I am proud to be a product, so I have a vested interest there, and Rugby High School, where my daughter is in fact a pupil. And we also have a bilateral school in Ashlawn School, where there is a grammar stream alongside the secondary modern stream. And these schools are very, very popular with parents. There are an enormous number of children who sit the examination to try to secure a place, and we have parents who move into Rugby in order to gain access to those schools. And the email that I received this morning is from a parent who lives in the village of Binley Woods, which again is a particular connection for me, because I grew up in that particular village and travelled from Binley Woods to Lawrence Sheriff School in Rugby every day, a journey of about 8 miles. And the email from the parent says to me, my son is due to attend Lawrence Sheriff School this coming September. Well, the answer to the parent that I can go back to is that, of course, her son won't be affected by these proposals because they won't take effect for the entry for her son. But it may be a matter of concern for this parent if Warwickshire do make the change in the way that Lancashire are considering, that what would happen if her son goes into the grammar school in September and there is a change made. I hope whatever happens, that if any county council makes such a change, those children who take entry before the change takes place will continue to get their discretionary support. But my honourable friend drew attention to an absurd example in his constituency, and I'm about to give the Minister an absurd example, because what my constituent says to me, that the allocated non-selective school for the children who live in Binley Woods is Bilton High School. Very good school, one that I visit very regularly. But that school is 8 miles away from Binley Woods. But the Lawrence Sheriff School is exactly the same distance. So we have the absurdity of the situation here is that if the child who has done well in a selective exam and has gone to the appropriate school for their skills and their abilities, the kind of school that's going to bring them on best in life, that if they choose to turn down the place at the grammar school, then their travel will be paid for, because the school will be the secondary modern school, Bilton High School, will be the closest school. But if the child, having worked very hard, secured a place at the grammar school, and they take that particular place, then the transport will not be paid for. And this is just absolutely crazy. It's a system that cannot exist. My honourable friend is entirely right to draw attention to the fact that students from low-income backgrounds, and I have the Warwickshire County Council's policy here telling me those families of relatively modest means where the discretionary payment would continue to apply, whether or not Warwickshire make this change. But my concern is perhaps that those parents who just fall below that, those who are, there's something of a cliff face here, and if for a parent the cost of paying for transport to the grammar school could conceivably be a reason not to take up the grammar school place. And for somebody who sat in a grammar school class and is a great supporter of the principle of retaining our grammar schools, and I sat in a class with fellow pupils from very ordinary backgrounds, people who worked in cement factories, were engineers, were electricians of very ordinary backgrounds, and people who took advantage of that grammar school education to go on and do well in life. We seem to be here here there is a grave danger of putting a barrier in the way of people who might be denied the opportunity of access to the very excellent education that our grammar schools provide. And so, therefore, Mr Walker, I join with my honourable friend. I will, of course, make my own representation to this consultation. I've made my views very clear in today's debate, but I would ask the Minister whether he might consider extending the statutory requirements to include those parents who wish their child to go to a school other than the one that is nearest. And I wonder if he might also comment on the absurd situation of these two schools, almost exactly the same distance, where one would get the transport paid and the other would not. I'll happily give way.
I'm just wondering whether he, like me, is somewhat suspicious as well about these consultations, because Lancashire had a consultation as well. And there's no doubt in my mind that the vast majority of people would have said, no, we prefer the system to carry on as it is, and that the county uses its discretion. And my suspicion is that this consultation, as irrespective of how persuasive I know my honourable friend can be, and I'm sure his constituents, will end up just saying, well, I'm sorry, we have to save the money. They do it in Lancashire, they do it in several other places, and we're going to force them to pay.
Well, my honourable friend makes a fair point, but I think this is a consultation. I will be making representation. I'll be encouraging the parents that I come into contact with, and my constituents, to make representation to Warwickshire County Council in exactly the same way. And of course, we do understand the pressure on local government finance, and it's entirely right that local authorities look wherever they can to avoid excessive expenditure, to operate, to get more for less, to spend the taxpayers' money wisely. But where we've got a situation such as this, where I am horrified at the prospect of a very bright and capable child from a household just outside of the category where they would get support, that may act as a disincentive for these youngsters coming forward and putting their name in for the selection exam and possibly getting the education that will enable them to do well later on in life. So I will take the consultation at face value. I shall continue to lobby county councillors in Warwickshire so that they know and understand the possible consequences of what might happen here, and I'm pretty certain that the representations that will be made during the consultation will be on the same side as my honourable friend and myself. Happily give way to the honourable gentleman.
Thank you very much. I apologise for being late to this debate. It's an excellent debate. Whilst the Education Select Committee has not yet been formed, I would suggest that it is certainly an issue that might well be considered by that committee in due course within the context of proper choice of schools and also within the context of making sure we get value for money.
Well, it's encouraging to hear that this may be something that the Select Committee may consider. And if I may just sum up by reading out the final sentence from my constituent's email, which says, why should my son be potentially discriminated against for being successful in the selection exam?
Members trying to catch my eye before I call the front bench? No. Mr McCabe.
Mr Walker, it's a pleasure to see you in the chair. Can I begin by congratulating the honourable gentleman for Ribble Valley for securing this important debate. I doubt there can be a single member of this House who hasn't at some time or other come across the vexed issue of school transport, usually at some kind of advice centre. I just want to very quickly cover the duties, as I understand it, the duties and powers of the local authorities in England to provide home-to-school transport are, and I'm sure the Minister will confirm this, governed by the 96 Education Act as amended, and these are further clarified by the Home-to-School Travel and Transport Guidance for local authorities, which actually was fairly recently updated, only July of last year. The guidance covers the statutory duties a local authority must abide by when making home-to-school arrangements, and it also provides local authorities with advice on discretionary powers to make provision for children where there is no statutory obligation. I think the point that the honourable gentleman was focusing on. And as I understand it, the guidance applies to virtually the vast majority of schools, community, foundation, voluntary, non-maintained special schools, referral units, maintained nurseries, city technology colleges, colleges for technology of the arts, academies, free schools, university technology colleges, and an independent school can also be covered if that school is named in the child's education, care and health plan. So pretty comprehensive. Now, it seems to me, Mr Walker, there are three main issues which affect the arguments about the provision of school transport. Firstly, the cost. I think the honourable gentleman from Ribble Valley and I may not have an identical view on this, but I think we all heard his point about the cost. So the cost, and as far as I'm concerned, the fact that this is borne increasingly by impoverished local authorities. Secondly, the allocation and provision of school places, which seems to me to be resulting in an ever-increasing number of children, at least in some parts of the country, having to travel substantial distances to school. And then finally, the question of safety and the emphasis on motor transport rather than walking or cycling, which I think was a point that the honourable member for Glasgow Central alluded to. Now, as the pressure on public spending intensifies, Mr Walker, many local authorities have found themselves facing funding reductions of around 37% over the period 2010-11 to 2015-16. And of course, as many members will recognise, these cuts aren't exactly applied fairly across the board, with reductions that can vary from 5 to 40%. Needless to say, councils with the greatest need and the greatest deprivation, like my own in Birmingham, are being required to take the largest share of these cuts. And it's hardly surprising in these circumstances that local authorities are finding it harder and harder to provide school transport. The Public Accounts Committee, in its report of the 20th of January of this year, warned that further cuts might not just undermine the viability of optional services, but even some statutory services. And it seems to me, when it comes to school transport, that's exactly what's happening. Often it's local authorities tinkering with the distance rules as a means of excluding people, but in every essence it's an attempt to cost save. And of course, schools are sitting, they have plenty of other pressures, schools, not least the pensions issue, which is looming, I think, for the Minister. But schools are sitting on quite large reserves. The DFE's own figures show that 4,400 academies, as of March 2014, had reserves of £2.47 billion, some way behind 18,700 local authority maintained schools had reserves of £2.18 billion. Now, I'm afraid I meet plenty of local authority leaders who ask me why the schools shouldn't pay for or at least contribute to the transport costs when they're sitting on these reserves and they're facing such cuts. The honourable gentleman... Of course.
I'm a former school governor when I was on West Glamorgan County Council. And in many cases, of course, schools save that money for capital projects. And some of these projects could run into millions. So that money wouldn't really be available to spend on other projects.
Well, I'm a former school governor as well, Mr Walker, and I actually do acknowledge that there are other pressures in schools, but I was pointing out that they're sitting with reserves. Local authorities are largely being encouraged by the Secretary of State to use theirs up. The honourable gentleman referred to this problem, which I totally sympathise with, of parents being asked to pay £500. I don't know if you saw the recent article in the Bournemouth Echo. I'm sure he's an avid reader of that. But It highlighted the plight of parents who attend the Parkfield Free School. This is a school that was set up and is now having to move to a different, more satisfactory base. Unfortunately, its new location isn't particularly well served by public transport, and there is a business willing to provide a school bus service, but at a cost of £650 to the parents, because neither the school nor the local authority feels able to subsidise that transport cost. And I really wondered when I read about that, and as I listened to the honourable gentleman today, if he was simply describing the shape of things to come. Given the importance of getting children to school safely, Mr Walker, I wonder if the government needs to look again at the guidance, even if it was only reviewed last year, and at the funding arrangements. The honourable member suggests that maybe we could extend the travel distance, or we could cut salaries of some local authority officers. That may be one way. I wonder if the Minister could also look at whether or not it's right that this duty should rest solely with local authorities. Now, I think we all kind of tend to look a bit nostalgically at the time when many of us would have walked to school. But, of course, that was at a time when the concept of local school was actually quite a common thing. The honourable member for Ribble Valley, he referred to the problems of choice and locality and the confusion over preference and allocations of places. And I certainly recognise what he was describing, but I want to suggest that actually the pressure on school places largely is resulting from the imbalance in current provision, which is a direct result of government policy. It's resulted in additional capacity in some areas and insufficient places in others, often in the areas with the very highest numbers of children. Members, and I think the honourable gentleman for Rugby and Bilkington concentrated on it, members have referred to the barriers to children attending grammar schools and other schools of their choice. That's certainly happening, Mr Walker, but in other cases the capacity argument means that children are sometimes being forced to travel great distances to school. In March of this year, the Daily Mail, I know that's a paper the Minister's very fond of reading, the Daily Mail reported on one mother from South London who complained that she's forced to drive her son 25 miles to his current school because she can't obtain a place at her local school, which is down the road and round the corner. Repeatedly, we hear stories about children having to make journeys that involve several buses after failing to get a place locally. This pressure is further added to by admissions policies, which often result in children in the same household attending different schools. Again, I think a point the Honourable Lady for Glasgow Central drew our attention to. Now, every year around this time, Mr Walker, I'm inundated at my advice centres with parents experiencing this problem of not getting the school of their choice or preference. And I really say to the Minister, can it be right that a 5-year-old is expected to make a 2.5-mile taxi journey to a school because he can't get a place at the school nearest to where he lives? What assessment has the Minister made of the pressure on school places and the distance children are having to travel? Doesn't this mean that whatever the arguments about academies or free schools, what we do need is a more rational planning arrangement so that we have more school places where they're actually needed? It's worth noting, Mr Walker, that in the guidance, local authorities are obliged to provide free transport where there's no safe walking route, however close to the actual school the child may live. Now, there can't be many of us who haven't witnessed the traffic problems around local schools at the start and the end of the school day. Traffic problems largely generated by parents who not only want to collect and drop off their children, but want to park as close to the school gate as possible. At one school in my constituency, I was told recently about an incident where a parent actually managed to knock down a child as she attempted this manoeuvre. Now, fortunately, there was no serious damage done, but the stressed driver, rather than apologise immediately, got out of her car and castigated the child for not paying sufficient attention while she was trying to park. I say that pressure around the school gate is really making life far too difficult for too many children. And I note that over 27% of parents now automatically drive their children to school these days. 23% of cars on the road at peak times are taking children to or from school, despite the fact that 19% of school journeys are actually under a mile, a distance which I'm told you can comfortably walk in around 20 minutes if you're not even trying very hard. So clearly we need to give much more thought to how we create a safer environment in the immediate vicinity of schools and what the government can do to help deliver a sensible cycling and walking strategy as proposed by the Living Streets charity. At a time when we're rightly concerned about childhood health and obesity, it's remarkable how few children actually walk these days. I'm very impressed by the charity Break and other road safety charities who've been calling for safe travel zones around our schools, an approach which covers speeding traffic, crossings, inconsiderate parking, cycling and walking. And in that context, I welcome the government's target of 55% of 5 to 10-year-olds walking to school. But we won't achieve this unless there's some deliberate and specific action, and maybe the Minister could say what he has in mind. So I want to conclude, Mr Walker, by asking the Minister to look again at the guidance and whether schools and the local authorities and others could be encouraged to share this burden of the cost of school transport. I have to say I've given up hope of local authorities getting fair funding deals, but his own backbench colleagues are now asking him to look at this issue. Could he look at the provision of places and the possibility of a more rational planning framework? And could he maybe tell us what parental choice means in this day and age if parents aren't able to go to the school of their choice for the reasons his honourable friends are stating? And finally, can I ask him to look again and to tell us what steps he's taken regarding safer, healthier alternatives to getting children to and from school?
Before I call the Minister, I'd just say he's got a lot to get his teeth into. The debate is due to end at 4:30. Gosh, that is quite a long time, actually. But if the Minister is minded to take up most of that time, could he leave a couple of minutes for Mr Evans at the end to respond?
Squeeze my remarks into that remaining time if I can. Can I say what a pleasure it is to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Walker, and to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Ribble Valley, for securing this debate and for his excellent and compelling opening speech. He's a strong advocate for his constituency on a range of issues, and here's another example of that strong advocacy for his constituencies. And can I also congratulate the honourable member for Rugby and the honourable member for Glasgow Central on their contributions to this debate, citing their own constituency issues as well. But can I say to the honourable member, the member for Birmingham Selly Oak, that I have to say that it is unwise of him to talk about school planning places when the last Labour government eliminated 200,000 primary school places at a time when it was absolutely clear that the birth rate was increasing. So one of the first things the last coalition government had to do in coming into office was to double the amount of spending on creating new school places at a time of enormous constraint on the public finances. And over that period, we've spent several £billion providing more school places to make up for the backlog that we inherited in 2010. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Minister, just in case you misunderstood me, I'm not disputing whether or not the government's creating more places. I'm talking about the problem it's creating by giving us overcapacity in one area and insufficient places where children are living. That's the difficulty. It's about the planning, not the number.
But of course, the planning becomes easier if you haven't got to catch up on a huge deficit in school places. But my honourable friend, the member for Ribble Valley, has consistently championed the practical importance of school transport to children and their parents in his constituency. And where schools are beyond reasonable walking distance, parents should be entitled to expect the local authority to support transport arrangements. And this rightly remains a statutory duty upon local authorities. And this afternoon, my honourable friend has highlighted the impact of local authorities' decisions in the context of a tight fiscal position. To consider the availability of transport to schools, which are parents' first choice, but which the local authority deems are not the nearest suitable school. Now, the government is committed to securing a good school place for every child. Today, more than 1 million more children attend good or outstanding schools than in 2010. 260 new free schools set up by local charities, trusts and groups of parents are offering education which meets the needs of their communities. In addition, the government has spent more than £5 billion in funding local authorities to create new school places over the last Parliament, and we've announced a further £3.6 billion over the next 3 years. The sponsored Academies programme has turned around 1,154 underperforming schools over the last 5 years, ensuring that more pupils benefit from the highest standards of education. And there are few more important choices a parent makes for their child than the school they attend. And thanks to our reforms, in many cases, increasingly, this will be the nearest and most conveniently located school. Others, though, may decide that their child's education would best be served by attending a school further away from home. And this might be because the performance of the nearest school is not yet good enough, or because of considerations about the school's specialism, ethos, faith, status, as my honourable friend alluded in his examples, and in some areas where the school is academically selected, as my honourable friend, the member for Rugby, alluded. Local authorities are under a statutory duty to provide free transport for pupils in compulsory education at their nearest suitable school, where this is beyond the statutory walking distances. And these thresholds are, as has been said, 2 miles for children under the age of 8 and 3 miles for those aged 8 and above. And under the terms of the universal statutory duty, suitable school is taken to mean the nearest qualifying school with places available that provides education appropriate to the age, ability and aptitude of the child. And if a child has passed a grammar school entry test, for example, the local authority would not necessarily deem other nearer schools as unsuitable. Now, Mr. Walker, for children from low-income family backgrounds, all local authorities are under an additional duty to enable children to access a wider range of schools, including attending faith schools. And this duty, as has been said, is known as extended rights and attracts national funding worth almost £20 million in this financial year. Now, the extended rights policy helps children from low-income groups where a lack of affordable transport might act as a barrier to choice. It enables some of the most disadvantaged pupils to secure fair access to a wider range of schools, and children are eligible if they're entitled to free school meals or if their parents are in receipt of maximum working tax credit. And where these criteria apply, pupils are given additional financial support towards school transport. And this policy amends the statutory walking distances so that local authorities must also provide free transport for these pupils where the nearest school is, I'm just going to cite this, beyond 2 miles if over the age of 8 but below the age of 11, or beyond 2 miles but less than 6 miles, age 11 or over, and there are not more than 3 suitable nearest schools, or beyond 2 miles but under 15 miles, age 11 or over, where attending the nearest suitable school is on the grounds of religion or belief. But as my honourable friend said, that applies to those children, but of course it does not apply to the children whose parents do not qualify for this extended rights. Now, although parents do not enjoy a specific right to have their children educated at a school with a religious character or a secular school, or to have transport arrangements made by their local authority to and from such a school, the extended rights policy includes the nearest suitable school on the grounds of religion or belief up to 15 miles, as there are often fewer faith schools within a reasonable distance. And even if children don't have a statutory entitlement to free home-to-school transport, local authorities do have a discretionary power to provide free or assisted transport if they believe it's necessary and local funding is available. Now, I'm aware that in the Ribble Valley, Mr Walker, Lancashire County Council has historically provided free home-to-school transport to catchment area schools, regardless of whether this is the nearest school. And I should also point out that expenditure on home-to-school transport is currently around £1 billion nationally, and approximately 600 million of that is spent on special educational needs transport. And that total figure has remained broadly consistent over the last 3 financial years. And although the proportion allocated to special educational needs transport is showing a gradual increase over that period. Now, Lancashire County Council's total expenditure on home-to-school transport has also remained broadly consistent with the amount spent on special educational needs having reduced very slightly over the 3-year period. Now, I understand that from September 2015, as my honourable friend has explained, Lancashire County Council introduced a package of measures to reduce their home-to-school travel costs, one of which is to remove this discretion county-wide of paying travelling expenses to catchment area schools where there is a nearer school. For new pupils starting this September, the local authority will only fund transport to their nearest school, and these changes are being phased in, and a child who started at a school under one set of arrangements will continue to do so. And I know that for some parents who wish to send their child to a religiously designated school, that chosen school may not be their nearest, and in that case, Lancashire County Council requires parents to contribute towards the overall cost of transport. Now, where possible, I would urge local authorities, including Lancashire County Council, to consider preserving discretionary school transport support for disadvantaged pupils and to consult widely about any plans to change arrangements. And good practice also suggests that when parents are asked to pay all or some costs for non-statutory transport provision, low-income families who are not eligible for the extended rights should not have to pay. That is good practice, albeit it is not compulsory under law. My honourable friend also raises the issue of schools that back onto each other. And he cited the example of the Catholic school along a Ginnell, I think he used that word, to the school that they are entitled to have free school transport to. And all I would say on that, Mr Walker, is I would urge the local authority to be reasonable and to look at this in the context that my honourable friend so ably explains. And I would say the same point to my honourable friend, the member for Rugby, with the example that he cited of Binley Woods and the Lawrence Sheriff School and the Grammar School, be cited so far as Warwickshire County Council is concerned, but I know that he has responded to the consultation which is ongoing at the moment. Now, the government is also encouraging more people to cycle or walk to school, particularly in urban areas, and we've set an ambition to increase the percentage of school children aged 5 to 10 years old to walk to school to 55% by 2025, and we've made a long-term funding commitment of over £400 million for cycling and walking available to every local authority in the country until 2021. If I can just cite one example of Darlington Borough Council, which has encouraged a shift away from the car to more sustainable methods under the brand Local Motion. And central government has provided funding for this project since 2011. It ensures that schools, young people and their families receive relevant information to enable them to choose sustainable travel options to get to and from school. And as a result, cycling rates amongst secondary school pupils in that local authority area have increased from 1% to 7%. So the government recognises, though, that... I'll happily give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm interested in what he's describing here. Am I right in thinking that local authorities are not obliged to tie this funding to travel to school plans, and that some local authorities can choose to spend it in other ways? If that's right, wouldn't it make more sense to specifically require them to take the travel to school issue into account when spending this money?
Well, we do believe in local discretion. I know my honourable friend argued that we should remove this discretion. And the honourable gentleman, member for Birmingham Selyoke, is hinting that he would like to remove some of this discretion. But the philosophy of the government has been that local authorities should have this discretion to spend this money as they see fit to respond to local circumstances. And that's really has been the policy for many years. We believe they are best placed to determine how their resources should be used in the areas they serve and to balance the demands of a broad range of discretionary travel against their budget priorities. If we were to remove this discretion from local authorities' responsibilities, it would hugely increase the number of eligible children at a substantial cost to the taxpayer, and it's therefore much more practical and helpful to allow local authorities to continue to make these important decisions locally. But they still need to make the right decisions locally. And there are many authorities that are doing some very good work, and for example, encouraging schools to collaborate with one another to use some of their own resources to fund this. For example, many academies are collaborating with other stakeholders and providers to offer discretionary transport to their schools. Hertfordshire, for example, will save about between £5 and £6 million per annum as a result of schools doing this. From September 2012, they've only provided statutory home-to-school transport. And that local authority wanted to build capacity locally to encourage schools, community groups and commercial operators to provide home-to-school transport. And from September 2013, 130 routes to schools operate without a financial subsidy from the council. So there are creative ways that this is happening by innovative local authorities around the country. And I would urge both Warwickshire County Council and Lancashire County Council to look at these examples and to look at Darlington Borough Council to see whether they can learn from those examples. Now, the government, Mr Walker, does recognise, though, that there are particular difficulties in transport faced by rural areas. And the Department for Transport has therefore provided £7.6 million in funding for 37 schemes to deliver improved local transport in rural and isolated areas. And the funding will provide the essential first step for local authorities to implement service integration. Now, people living in these areas will be able to benefit from integrated public transport, meaning that local authorities will work with schools, hospitals and other local organisations to deliver local services more efficiently and at lower cost. And in conclusion, Mr Walker, I would just say to my honourable friend how grateful I am that he's raised these important issues on behalf of his constituents. A good local school within easy commuting reach is something which every parent has the right to expect for their child. And even as we continue to reduce the deficit, local authorities to continue to have a duty to provide school transport in many circumstances. And I share his view that discretionary services should be protected wherever possible.
Mr Walker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for the generosity of spirit in which he has treated this debate. I know it sounds like a bit of a love-in, really, in the way that we are praising one another, but I know that he is dedicated to ensuring that every parent is given choice where possible, and indeed every child has a decent education, which is what we all want to see. And part of that is clearly the choice. And I'm grateful to my honourable friend, the member for Rugby, for illustrating some of the anomalies that exist within his own constituency, the absurdity of the 8 Mile. Has anybody measured it? I wonder, with that one may be an inch further away than the other. But the fact is that penalising parents simply for choosing one school over the other. And I'm delighted to hear that I went to a selective school myself. I believe in a mix, but I'm delighted to hear that his selective schools are doing very well. And as I said right at the outset, all the schools in my patch, I'm so lucky, are excellent. But we don't want to get into the position where I know that which does happen on an increasingly basis, where parents move to ensure that their youngsters are able to get into certain schools. We want them all to be good so that nobody has really to take that particular choice. I'm also grateful to the Honourable Member for Glasgow Central and illustrating the problems that are facing increasing number of parents within Glasgow as well. And I know there's always seems to be a sense of blame shifting, that somebody else is responsible. It's not really our fault, and we would prefer not to do it, but we have to. Our hands are tied. But the real victims in all of this then are the parents and the children who have to increasingly put their hands in their own pockets. I'm extremely grateful to the Shadow Minister as well for some of his comments, and I would encourage youngsters to walk wherever they possibly can, but sometimes in rural areas the road system is bad and the distances, particularly when it's not primary schools. Most villages tend to have a primary school. In some cases they don't. But when it comes to secondary education, then clearly it is far more difficult. I was delighted to hear what the new chairman of the Education Select Committee had to say, that this is now on his shopping list of inquiries. And maybe this is some area where we can make some progress. Because I do think that I heard what the Minister said when he believes that the philosophy of the government is discretion. At the same time, he wants them to use that discretion to ensure that parents get the choice and they therefore pay for their school transport. But I think that if and particularly with this inquiry, that it is demonstrated that increasingly local authorities are not giving any discretion whatsoever, that they're seeing it now as an opportunity to dip in to parents' pockets, and they just simply aren't supporting parents in their parental choice, then hopefully this is something that they can expose and that the Minister will look again. I know that we give discretion up to a point to local authorities on council tax, but we encourage them to freeze, and certainly not to go above a certain rate, otherwise it's punitive for them. And maybe this is something that we can now look at for local authorities as well, where they are wholesale ignoring the discretion that they've got, that they are imposing these transport costs on parents with, and I said in Lancashire's case, with a 5% increase, real terms increase, year on year, which really can be quite painful financially for some parents, particularly if they are just over that limit, as my honourable friend for Rugby pointed out, on tax credits or free school meals, or indeed they've got more than one child. So in closing, Mr Walker, can I say that clearly the book is not closed on this one, and I do hope and I trust the Minister that he will keep a very beady eye. I will make absolutely certain Lancashire County Council get a report of the proceedings here today so that they can see what the intention of the government is, what they want to see the county councils do, and if that they don't follow, that we will revisit this subject in the coming months ahead.
The question is that this House has considered the cost of school transport. As many of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.